When I first heard about Star Wars Visions, an anthology anime series in the world of Star Wars, I was thrilled with the news. As a fan of anime myself, I wanted nothing more than to see the movie franchise that I've always loved, Star Wars, but in anime form. And knowing of all the potential it had, I dreamed of the day that we'd get to see a Studio Ghibli or Studio Bones make a true Star Wars anime series in canon. But when we did finally get to see our first look at Visions earlier this year, I admittedly wasn't crazy at what I was seeing. As, yeah, it was anime, but not the type of anime that I was thinking we'd get. Not only did it feature different art styles that I didn't really care for, but it was neither canon nor looked much like Star Wars to begin with. Despite all of that, I didn't want to write off Visions without giving it a try, as not only would that be unfair, but also a terrible thing to do as a reviewer, and potentially deprive myself of what could be, seriously, some good Star Wars content. So even though not initially feeling any need to rush into Visions, I did eventually check it out, just with low expectations. Naturally, I watched Visions in the English version since I've only ever consumed all of my Star Wars content in English. Not to mention it is also the official language of the Star Wars universe, aka Basic, so it would be a little weird to watch it in Japanese on the first viewing, at least for me. Especially since I'm not Japanese, nor do I speak the language. That said, I do plan on doing a rewatch of the entire series in Japanese later on, just out of curiosity to get their perspective and all. But yeah, rather than doing a review on what I liked and didn't like per each Visions episode, I'm instead squeezing all 9 episodes into this one video. So I'm going to try to run through each episode as fast as possible just to give my main thoughts on them without rambling on too much. That said, do keep in mind that these are only my opinions, not facts, and as anime is largely subjective to begin with, I'm obviously not gonna share the same thoughts on everything as everyone else, which is fine. Also, I do want to state that I will touch on some spoilers as I did have issues with some specific things here and there, but at the same time I won't be going into super heavy story details either, so regardless, spoiler warning ahead. Episode 1, The Duel. Our very first introduction to Visions, and I feel with this one you're either going to love it or hate it. For its art style, I'm very mixed about it. I kinda like it, but also not at the same time. It's just far too much shading in there for my liking. It's way too dark and makes it difficult to pay attention to what you're watching half the time. I get what they were trying to go for, but in my opinion, they just overdid it here. As for its story, well, to put it quick, it felt more like some random samurai short film set in feudal Japan. But of course with some Star Wars elements sprinkled in there to keep it on brand just for the sake of it. I will say that I did enjoy the twist that it had with the Sith on Sith reveal, which honestly was the best and only thing I actually liked about the whole episode. Otherwise, it felt rather drab and predictable. Aside from the neat dueling animations, I found myself getting bored with it, so yeah. Not exactly what you'd call a good first impression on Visions. An okay episode at best. Episode 2, Tatooine Rhapsody. Yeah, I don't really have much to say about this one. It had some unique, somewhat chibi art style that I never thought I'd see Star Wars in, but it kinda worked in the end. I will say that it had an interesting story about a Jedi Padawan that ends up being a lead singer for a space band, which is not something you usually see in the many different stories of those Jedi who do survive Order 66. And sure, I did like the inclusion of Boba Fett here, and the Mos Espa Grand Arena set especially looked real well done thanks to the CGI that they used. Although I didn't like how it was never explained why Jabba wanted the band hut to be executed, which seems like something we the viewers should know about why, considering it's such a vital piece of the plot and all. But overall, this was simply just a meh kind of episode in my book. Episode 3, The Twins. Oh yeah, the one with the art style that frankly really annoyed me. Mainly because it was all over the place, just like the episode itself. And I don't quite get it. It made 99% everything else look super basic, yet randomly put detail on the two lead character faces, making it feel almost like they were from a completely different episode due to the style clash. As for the story, I can't say I like that either. And that's because it's never explained how a Sith born literally straight out of the dark side somehow randomly joins the light side. Yeah, right, sure, he wanted to save his sister and he became a good guy. Come on, he's a Sith. Besides, you could still be on the dark side and do that, or at least not fall completely to the light side just to do it. Also, why didn't he use his red lightsaber during the big fight scene? Like, what happened to it? I doubt a Sith Lord spent this much time ruling on the Empire without having their very own lightsaber. In addition to that, I have to stress just how everything else about this episode was so way over the top than it needed to be. Like the twin Star Destroyer design, the fighting scene, breathing in space, going into hyperspace and yet somehow not killing the sister during the entire process. Yeah, none of it made sense, and it ended as confusing as it started. Although I did at least find it somewhat humorous how the children born out of the dark side both happen to look like Aryans with the blonde hair and the blue eyes. So yeah, I may have not liked it, but I'm sure Hitler would have at least loved this episode just for that part alone. Episode 4, The Village Bride. Okay, finally a normal anime art style. The story here is alright, but I found the execution of it to be rather lacking. The pace is also very slow, and I found myself getting bored for most of it. I did like the inclusion of the B1 battle droids, that's at least something, as they were the best part in it here for me, but had it not been for them, you wouldn't even think that this had anything to do with Star Wars. Pretty much felt like some generic Japanese space fantasy, especially with how the lightsaber and the Jedi attire look like here, which is definitely similar to what I've seen in some other obscure animes that, guess what, had nothing to do with Star Wars either. Episode 5, The Ninth Jedi. First off, amazing anime art style in this one. This episode has it all, great visuals, action, twists, and comedy too. Unlike all of the rest of the episodes of Visions thus far, I didn't have to force myself through this one. Instead, I was actually invested and enjoying what I was watching for the first time, and all I can say is finally. The story here wasn't rushed, it had great pacing, some fantastic cinematography, especially using 3D elements during that chase scene in the forest, and best of all, this actually legit felt like a real Star Wars anime. It had depth, mystery, interesting characters, and surprisingly had the Force play a big part in it too. I love the idea of having the lightsabers change their appearance based on the user's connection with the Force, and how Kara, while at first of a colorless lightsaber, later strengthened her bond with the Force to get a green saber. All of course done very subtly, not forcing it in your face, but instead letting things flow in the episode. The twist that we get here too is just chef's kiss. Without a doubt, for me at least, this is the best twist that any episode in Visions has had. No doubt, this is by far my favorite out of the bunch. Episode 6, T0B1. First off, let me say this was way too Saturday morning cartoon and goofy for my liking. Granted, I think kids will love this art style, but it's not for me. Basically, for the most part, this episode felt like a what if we had Mega Man or Astro Boy but in Star Wars. And yeah, I don't really think that's an idea anyone really ever asked for. Yet here we are, we got it in Visions. That said, the story here surprised me a little bit, as while it wasn't anything special per se, it also wasn't that bad for what it was trying to be or do. Now, do I have questions on how a droid can become one with the Force? Yeah. But then I think back that this is a wacky short film about a Star Wars Mega Man Jedi trained by a armless Dr. Light all in the middle of nowhere. Then obviously at that point it's senseless to even begin questioning that and not its plot. Overall, it was way too outlandish for me with both its story and Disney-esque art style. To put it politely, it's not something I'd really recommend. Episode 7, The Elder. Another episode of a great art style that actually looks like a traditional anime. The story here is something we're quite used to by now, focusing on a Jedi and his Padawan who feel a disturbance in the Force. So nothing exactly new, but I did end up enjoying this one a lot. What exactly did it for me was the lingering mystery this episode had and leaned real heavy on. While some may see the pacing rather slow, I thought it worked real well here, especially the big payoff with the final duel. And this is for sure what I wanted to see from Visions. Rather than a Japanese story sprinkled in with Star Wars bits and pieces just for the sake of it, this is instead a proper Star Wars story purely fueled by with Japanese inspiration. It's subtle and not so in your face like episode 1 for example was. Rather, you feel like you're actually watching Star Wars and that's it. Even though you're really experiencing a samurai tale in disguise within the Star Wars world, and I love that. This definitely was my second favorite out of the bunch, and heck, not to mention, this would even work in canon too, so that alone is a big plus for me. Episode 8, Lop and Ocho. Now this one had a seriously good and breathtaking art style, reminding me purely of the anime I grew up with in the 90s. And the mix of 3D and 2D here really helped enhance the overall beauty of this episode. Story-wise, I don't really know how to feel about it. I like the idea of the Empire enslaving Leppies and bringing them to strange worlds as slave labor, but I just found it strange how the main character Lop randomly got adopted by the Yasaburo clan just because they've got lots of food? Okay? I don't get it, and the writers clearly don't care if you do or not, you just go along with it. The pacing is also not great, and the other main character, Ocho, turning to the dark side feels rushed and out of place. Not to mention the ending is abrupt and makes no sense. Because you're telling me the Empire is defeated by the few members of the Yasaburo clan who stayed on, even though the vast majority chickened out and ran away? Yeah, it just makes me scratch my head. There's no way they beat the Empire in that. Also, the Sane Scouter that Lop had on the entire time really bugged me, like, what was the point of even having it here? It served absolutely no purpose but to keep reminding me of Dragon Ball Z while watching Star Wars. That's a thing apparently. Overall, I really wanted to like this episode. The art style was beautiful, the animation was superb. Generally speaking, it was gorgeous to look at, but everything else about it was rather meh. Episode 9, Akakiri. Ah yes, the last episode of Visions where people have flat faces and long, slender arms. Certainly the art style here is quite unique but yet awkward at the same time. Personally, it's not my cup of tea and almost every character here was painful to look at. I mean, just look at this. Ugh. Ugh. Ew. As for the story, it's not any better. A Jedi comes to a planet seeking to kill the Sith ruling it. Then the twist we get is that he turns to the dark side after killing his friend Misa, only because she attacked him while being in disguise. Okay, why? If you dress as the enemy, then attack your friend without them knowing it's you, what do you expect will happen? Then when she comes back to life using the dark side, he still wants to become a Sith, even though he's against everything the Sith stand for, but still wants to become one? I don't know, it makes no sense at all. Okay, fine, maybe she was being forced onto him, but still, say something at least. Also, the Jedi Tsubaki makes a point of how much he doesn't believe in destiny, despite being tempted by the Sith that his destiny is the dark side. Yet in the end, he just goes along with it anyway when he really doesn't have to. I don't know, maybe I missed the genius at work here or something, but either way, this episode didn't really resonate with me. It was just weird and a real drag to get through, honestly. Majority of the time, it didn't even feel like I was watching Star Wars, and had they not mentioned Sith or Jedi, then you would not even know this was in any way related to Star Wars. So yeah, big thumbs down for me on this one. It was the worst of Visions. And there we have it, our first ever Star Wars anime series finally a reality. While it may have started out and ended poorly in my opinion, a lot of the stuff in the middle was pretty good. Even surprising me at how high quality it was and that you could really tell how much the writers loved and knew about Star Wars. If anything, Visions is kind of like a hamburger where the top and the bottom are the bread pieces, which are meh, but the real meat of it all is in the middle, and that's what we got here. So to summarize, the good aspects for me in Visions were the good animation work, the voice acting was fantastic, the music was amazing, some incredible and imaginative stories and twists that come along with them, and I really like the inclusion of the Sith. It's not anymore Dark Jedi this, Inquisitor that nonsense, but classic Jedi vs Sith tales that we always heard and seen about from the EU Old Republic era. Now as for some bad points and Visions, well, that's where the rush story episodes come in with so many unanswered questions that leave you confused. The art styles could be a hit or miss depending on what you like or don't. Some episodes can seriously be way over the top even for anime standards, while others don't really feel like Star Wars other than some familiar visual cues sprinkled in here and there. Which I kinda found to be my main problem with Visions, as it leaned far too much into the Japanese culture aspect, when things like that have nothing to do with Star Wars, rather really only the formula of samurai movies, not the culture itself of Japan. So when we did get some episodes that feel like Star Wars stories but with Japanese creativity, rather than simply Japanese stories with a pinch of Star Wars flavor, then those ended up being my favorites like episode 5 and 7. But hey, this is anime. Like I said before, it's super subjective, and what I loved you may had hated. What I liked you may had disliked. What I disliked you may had liked, loved, whatever, you get the point. That all said, I'd like to hear what your thoughts and opinions are on Visions, as no doubt I know most of you are probably going to feel the exact opposite of me on some things, and that's fine. I'd love to hear what you all have to say in the comments down below about Visions and whether or not you'd want a second season of it. Because, hey, I know I certainly wouldn't mind it. This is N7 from Silo signing off.